Okay, got a command of evidence quantitative with the table. We're going to have to use the table, it looks like, with the underline to complete the text. So I'm going to need some data from the table to complete the idea here. Let's take a look. For a school project, a forestry student needs to recommend a maple tree that is native to North America and won't grow more than 60 feet in height. Based on the characteristics of 5 common maple trees, she has decided to select something that's in North America, okay, native to North America. So it's going to be among these and won't grow more than 60 feet. These grow more than 60 feet. So it has to be the red maple. She's going to choose the red maple based on the data in the table. C is the correct answer. Okay, we've got a command of evidence quantitative. Looks like we've got a chart with something, number of individual young fish that's declining into the fall from the winter, and 3 types of fish. Okay, let's see what's going on. We need to effectively complete the example. Okay, so we're going to again use something from the chart here that completes the example given here. So let's read. Mangroves are trees or bushes that grow in the coastlines of seas and rivers. Areas with mangroves are great places for young fish since they help keep these fish fed and protected while they grow. To study the importance of mangroves to young fish, researchers such and such collected and identified young fish from 3 different mangrove sites in the Egyptian Red Sea. They collected fish in the winter, spring, and autumn, so 3 seasons from 3 sites in 2010, collecting a total of 269 fish from 21 different species. For some species, more fish were collected in the winter than the other 2 seasons. For instance, okay, so our claim is some species more fish collected in the winter than the other 2 seasons. So if we look at the 3 types of fish here from our legend, the number of fish collected at the sites in the Red Sea was generally higher, with the exception of the Red Sea goatfish, which actually increases into the spring and then drops to the fall. So for some species, more fish were collected in the winter than the other 2 seasons. Okay, well, actually, the winter is here, so there were more fish collected by these 2. So it would have been the common silver buddy and the milkfish. More of those were collected than in any of the other 2 seasons. So, for example, it would be the common silver or the milkfish. So more common silver and milkfish were collected in the winter than in either of the other 2 seasons. That looks pretty good. I'm going to hold on to that. Let's just check the other answers. The common silver buddy was collected more frequently. Frequently? We don't know about frequently. That's very different than just saying more of the fish were collected in the winter. So that idea is not there in the actual chart. In the spring, researchers collected more Red Sea goldfish. So wait, more in the spring? We don't care about that. That's irrelevant to our idea, okay? So B is not actually accurate according to the data because the chart doesn't tell us anything about that. C is perhaps accurate, but it's just not relevant. We want to find more collected in the winter. In the fall, again, that's not going to be relevant. We want to know who is collected more in the winter. The correct answer is A. More of these 2 types of fish were collected in the winter according to the chart. Okay, we've got a command of evidence, which quotation. So we're going to have to find a quotation that supports the claim. Okay, so let's take a look. American fashion designer Patrick Kelly was known for his love of colorful buttons. Many of his signature dresses featured bold assortments of buttons throughout the garment. In a paper, a fashion design student claims that Kelly's use of buttons as decoration was inspired by his childhood observations of the styles and actions of the women in his family. So we need a quote that shows he was inspired by the women in his family to create colorful buttons. Okay? So A, although some of the assortment's buttons appear to be mismatched, pieces scattered randomly throughout Kelly's dresses, his most famous designs feature carefully crafted patterns of matching buttons. It says nothing about the family, the women of his family. We need that in the answer choice. Many of Kelly's contemporaries were inspired by his designs to incorporate buttons as well as zipper snaps. No, we don't care about the contemporaries. What we want to know is Was this artist motivated by the women in his family? Kelly's grandmother, okay, now we're talking family here, this looks good, who would repair clothing when he was a child, frequently added mismatched buttons to the clothes to draw attention away from flaws in the garments. Yes, that could have inspired him. So I'm going to hold on to that answer. Let's just check D. Kelly was destined to be a designer from a young age. He learned how to sew clothes. That says nothing about the actions and his observations of the actions of the women's family. Kelly was destined to be a designer from a young age. Okay. He learned how to sew clothing from his Aunt Bertha. Okay. But does that show his use of buttons as decoration was inspired by his observation? That doesn't say anything about use of buttons being inspired by observation. And his love of drawing was developed by his mother. Well, that says nothing about using buttons. So although that does point to, his family, it is not actually answering the question. C is the correct answer. He observed his grandmother, who added unusual buttons, which gave rise to his inspiration and style of using colorful buttons. C is correct. Okay, we've got a command of evidence, and we want to support the aviation researcher's claim, which is right there. So let's read. In addition to her technical skill and daring feats, American stunt pilot Bessie Coleman was also known for dazzling the crowds that came to watch her air shows. In the 1920s, with her exuberant personality, during her career, she was careful and purposeful about how she crafted her public persona. An aviation researcher has claimed that Coleman intentionally defied social norms of the time by how she chose to present herself in public. So she was very exuberant, outgoing, and used this as kind of PR, and that defied the social norms, I guess, for a woman to do that at that time. So let's see some quote that actually supports just that. For her air shows, Coleman frequently used the JN4 Jenny, which at the time was one of the most well-known types of planes. We don't care what type of plane. That is irrelevant to the question itself. We want to know if she was defying social norms when she sort of presented herself to the public. While Coleman was beloved by spectators for her charisma, she had a more complicated relationship with her managers and staff who at times found her behavior too impulsive and demanding. That doesn't say anything about defying social norms. C. Coleman once considered leaving her career as a stunt pilot to focus her efforts on giving speeches, which she felt would better support her public image. It says nothing about her using her aviation publicity to defy social norms. That's something entirely separate. It's not about her aviation career there. D. Although female pilots... Okay, this is probably going to be it. I like the contrasting transition. Although female pilots were typically expected to wear traditional but impractical attire that included dresses or skirts, photographs of Coleman show her wearing pants and leather jackets. That shows her defying the style. Contrasting transition. Although she was expected to do this, wear a dress, she actually wore pants and leather jackets, much like a male aviator. D is the correct answer. Okay, 27, we've got a column chart. This looks like a command of evidence quantitative, and I've got deformation rate of 5 volcanoes, which varies from low to high. So let's take a look. We need to complete this statement here, okay, with the chart above. So when magma moves underneath a volcano, it causes the surface of the volcano to change. This is known as deformation. Researchers recently calculated the amount of deformation occurring for each of 5 volcanoes in Latin America. So deformation is going to be our y-axis. Our x-axis is the different volcanoes, okay? And that, okay. Although Sierra Negra experienced a lot of deformation, and it looks like it did, that's Sierra Negra, its deformation rate was still lower than that of, well, Pacaya. Pacaya had a higher deformation rate. So the correct answer here is we want to look for an answer that shows Pacaya. and Pacaya. That had a higher deformation rate. That's the answer. Okay, looks like we've got another command of evidence, quantitative. Just quickly scanning, we've got by state, number of organic farms, states with the greatest organic farms. Looks pretty straightforward, that graph. Okay. And we want to complete the text with the information from the column chart. So let's read. Organic farming is a method of growing food that tries to reduce environmental harm by using natural forms of pest control and avoiding fertilizers made with synthetic materials. Organic farms are still a small fraction of the total farms in the United States, but they've been becoming popular. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in 2016, California had between 2,600 and 2,800 organic farms. And, okay, so here's our claim. California had 2,600, 800. And sure enough, that's correct. They did. And so we need an additional fact, which is probably going to come from one of the columns or the bars in one of the other states here. Washington had between 600 and 800. So remember, we're always checking these questions for accuracy to the table or the graph and then relevancy to the question. Here we're just reading off facts, so the only relevant answer will be the one that's accurate in this case. So did Washington have between 600 and 800? Looks like it. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to check that and hold on to that answer. New York had fewer than 800. New York had over 1,000, so that's not correct. That's wrong. It's inaccurate according to the graph. Wisconsin and Iowa each had 1,200 and 1,400. Wisconsin and Iowa had way less. Wisconsin was between 1,200 and 400. Iowa much less, so that's not accurate. Pennsylvania had more than 1,200. Pennsylvania only had 800, so that's not accurate. The answer here has to be A. It's the only answer that's accurate according to the data in the graph.